step into the fascinating world of the religious beliefs of the Vikings, where mythology weaves a complex tapestry. Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki, to name a few, Vikings believed in many gods, each with their own stories and ways of worship. Before Christianity became widespread, the Vikings practiced their own native religion. Christians later called it paganism and labeled its followers as heathens. However, for the Vikings, it was a tradition built on myths, featuring a very long list of gods and goddesses who watched over, controlled, and guided the events that happened in their lives. Gods and goddesses, sacrifices, giants, ghosts, and zombies. Join us today as we uncover the layers of Norse mythology, peeling back the curtain on a polytheistic, animistic, and pantheistic belief system that saw souls even in inanimate objects. Don't miss this opportunity to delve into the enchanting mysteries of Viking religious beliefs. However, before we get started, if you like this video, please hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Vikings believed that there were 9 different realms, or universes. Midgard was the one that people lived in. Asgard was the home of the gods. Vanaheim was the realm of the Vanir, a group of gods associated with wisdom, fertility, and the ability to see the future. The elves lived in Alfheim, dwarfs lived in Nidavellir, and the giants lived in Jotunheim. Niflheim was the realm of fog and ice. Muspelheim was the realm of heat and fire. Among these realms, 2 held significant roles in the afterlife. Helheim was the realm of the dead. It was a dark, cold place, much like a real grave. Helheim housed those who died of illness or old age, those who were not killed in battle. In contrast, Valhalla, a majestic hall located in Asgard, awaited fallen warriors who met their end honorably in battle. In Valhalla, grand banquets unfolded under the reign of Odin. Funeral rites were very important to the Vikings. They had 2 known ways of honoring death, either by cremation or burial. With cremation, Vikings believed that the smoke would carry the soul of the dead to the afterlife. The cremated remains might then be buried, likely in an urn. Fueled by the desire for a seamless transition into the next life, Vikings dedicated considerable effort to collecting personal belongings and coordinating meticulous funeral rites for their deceased kin. They had a tradition of draping the dead with new clothes to prepare for an unusual sort of funeral ceremony. From the outside, the last rites looked like a farewell party. People would dress up and there would be a feast. They would sing songs and end the day with heavy drinking. Then, grave goods, or tributes and gifts that were given to the dead, were either buried or burned with them. Historians also believed that there was one instance in particular where there was a human sacrifice for a Viking chief's funeral. An enslaved girl played the role of a companion in the chief's journey to the afterlife. This elaborate ritual entailed conducting sex rites with the woman before her sacrificial death, followed by the cremation of her body alongside that of the chief. Such practices underscored the Vikings' intricate relationship with death, reflecting a combination of reverence for the departed and a profound commitment to ensuring their smooth passage into the realms beyond. Ritual sacrifice was a part of the Vikings' belief system. Sacrifice was a way to appease the gods, and the offerings could include animals, humans, or inanimate objects. Human sacrifices were performed at funerals to accompany the dead into the next world, and also at regularly occurring religious festivals, such as Yule. The Norse god Odin was associated with hanging, and it is believed that Vikings would use those methods in human sacrifices directed to him. Vikings would also offer sacrifices in times of crisis, such as a drought or a flood. Sacrifice was a significant aspect of their religious beliefs, serving as a bridge between the mortal and supernatural realms. The Vikings aimed to maintain the favor of their gods by regularly offering sacrifices, emphasizing their commitment to the spiritual aspects of their worldview and the importance of appeasing the divine forces that governed their lives. Since nature played a big part in Viking religion, Vikings worshipped outside. Much like the other pagan religions, Vikings worshipped their gods out in the elements. Wooded areas with unusual trees, natural landmarks, waterfalls, oversized rocks, or anything in nature with an otherworldly feel would be a worthy place of worship. There were many gods, but the gods of most importance were Odin, the god of knowledge, Freya, the goddess of fertility, and Thor, the god of thunder and a symbol of strength and metalwork. All of these deities were representations of the aspects of life most important to the Viking people. Vikings believed in giants. The giants in Norse religion were called Jotun. These giants lived in Jotunheim and were the anti-gods who embodied chaos and destruction. The gods and the giants weren't actively feuding, but the Vikings believed the latter were supernatural beings with the same ancestry as gods. In fact, the giants are at the very top of the Norse family tree. They are founding fathers of some sort, meaning they came into being before the deities. As a menace to both gods and humans, these massive forces of nature were too big in size and numbers to wipe out, so they were banished to Jotunheim by the Norse gods. Vikings did not have a full-time priest. From what is known of the Norse religion, there didn't seem to be anyone designated as a religious leader within their communities. Instead, there were various leaders, often chieftains, who took on religious roles and performed sacrifices in addition to their main role within society. The king or chief was responsible for overseeing public faith, while private faith was up to each individual head of household. Ghost lore was big amongst the Norse people and was directly connected to their burial practices. The Vikings' version of a zombie was a drauga, an animated version of the dead. The Vikings believed that the corpses would rise up from their graves to protect their valuables that thieves loved to steal. But draugas were known to harm innocent humans too. This is why the Vikings took precautions. Before burying their dead, they would tie their toes together or press nails in their heels so they couldn't walk. Similarly, if the dead didn't get their well-deserved funeral rites, they would haunt the living in their sleep when it went completely dark. No wonder the Vikings took their funeral rituals pretty seriously. Giving birth to a child was a far more dangerous task back in the Viking age than it is today. Vikings prayed and sang to the fertility goddesses Freya and Frigg in hopes of protecting the mother and child. Being a Viking child was extremely hard. In the Viking tradition, an infant wasn't considered to be a human until the father formally accepted his child. You see, when children were born, they were left out in the open for 9 days, as a means to check their health. After that, a father would inspect his offspring for bodily deformities and diseases. If the child wasn't healthy, he would be left exposed to death. Once the child was declared healthy, the father would pick him up, put him on his knees, and sprinkle water on him. This was a popular form of baptism in Viking culture. The ceremony was called vatni. Then, of course, came the relatively simple naming process. The child was given a name inspired by the gods or goddesses and the family's ancestors. But, of course, the naming process was an occasion for celebration, and the event was called nafnfesti. This is when the child would receive an ultimate, life-defining gift from his father, which was usually a tool, a piece of jewelry, or a weapon. The Vikings had several matrimonial rituals, but for the most part, they celebrated the weddings in a regal way. There was music and festivities that would go on for days. Yet oddly enough, both the bride and the groom wore very simple clothes on their wedding day. What was unusual about the ceremony was the exchange of swords between the couple. The groom was accustomed to bringing an old family sword that would be passed on to his son. Only then would the couple say their vows and exchange rings. And then, of course, the guests would have a hearty meal. In the hall, the groom would also plunge his sword into a pillar for a fortune gimmick. The deeper the sword went into the pillar, the more children and happiness the couple would have. After the feast, the families would lead the bride and the groom to a secluded room where they could consummate their marriage. In the morning, The groom would hand over the keys to his house to his wife. And then the feasting would continue for days. There's no doubt that the Vikings were highly religious, but in many ways, their religion was a tradition that they were free to follow, as per their own choices. You see, the Norse religion wasn't organized, but outside the Scandinavian nations, the world was becoming increasingly Christianized. Some picked the new faith for its teachings, while some picked it for the political and economic advantages, such as setting up trade routes with Christian towns. But in the case of the Vikings, they didn't have much of a choice. When kings or monarchs converted to Christianity, they enacted laws that would force people to follow the religion of their choice. Some even began to destroy Norse temples and culture that existed within the people. Between the 8th and 12th centuries, the Vikings began to convert to Christianity, and their fascinating religious beliefs were lost forever.